Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the Bible, and Tanan said I had 40 minutes, and I have great news for you. I'm only taking like 18, okay? So everybody just breathe. It's going to be okay, all right? But I don't know how familiar you are with the Bible or how familiar you are with the Hebrew Bible, what we sometimes call the Old Testament. But there's this great riches to rags story, kind of in the front of the book. There's this guy by the name of Moses. And Moses, even though he's Hebrew, he's raised in an Egyptian palace. He's treated as an Egyptian prince. And so he's raised in a great deal of wealth. But one day he loses his cool and he kills another Egyptian. And his adopted uncle, the Pharaoh, is going to have him killed. And so he hightails it and he becomes a fugitive. And the next thing you know when you're reading is that this guy Moses has now gone from being a prince in Egypt to being a fugitive in a place called Midian. He marries a woman named Zipporah, has a father-in-law named Jethro, and as all good father-in-laws do, when their son-in-laws are out of work, he gives him a job. And he gives him a job being a shepherd, and one day when he's out watching the sheep, well, he looks across, and there's this huge bush, and it's on fire, except it's not being consumed. It's just burning, right? And so he goes to check it out, and when he goes to check it out, he finds out that the Creator God, the one true God, is somehow dwelling in that place right there with that burning bush, and tells him to take his shoes off out of respect. And then the God who is speaking from this bush, he tells Moses, who I bet hasn't had too many conversations with God up to that point. He tells him, he says, hey, listen, I got a little mission for you. I'm going to send you down to Egypt where you're going to free about 600,000 Israelites, okay? And I know that you're a fugitive and that they want to like execute you if you show up back down there, but just trust me, it's going to work out okay. And so Moses, he has some questions, as any of us would. In fact, I've heard people talk about what little faith he had. Little faith, at least he's thinking through the thing. I would have been running like a scalded dog, as fast as I could. But his first question, and it's so fascinating, his very first question to God is, he says, who am I to go, down and free these people? And it's interestingly enough that I find that's a fairly important question for all of us, no matter where you are in your life. From time to time, I've lived long enough to know that you need to ask the question, who am I? But then the next question is even more important. After he asks that question, he says to God, who are you? And again, interestingly enough, I'm persuaded, and not just because this is what I do for a living, this faith gig, but I'm persuaded that you need to ask every day that question. Who are you? And what's fascinating about it is that if you were to read in Exodus, if you were to read the story, and I recommend you do, not take my word for it, but if you read the story, what's fascinating is that God gives him one of the most confusing answers I've ever heard to a question. I mean, the first time I read it, I just didn't get it. And let me read it to you and see if it makes sense to you, because it really threw me the first time. Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. And the first time I read it when I was a brand new believer, while I was still in the Navy, I thought, wait a second, that's not a name, that's a verb. You can't call a fast one on me. I know a verb when I say, in fact, I got taught well, it's an irregular verb. I am. I mean, what would life be like if we went around calling each other by verbs? I'd be calling Brandon, I eat. You know, hey man, it'd be I sing. I've seen Kyung Mi today in the span of 30 minutes, not just play this beautiful thing. I've seen her do that for years, but she's changed outfits 3 times. And so I would call her I Change. Every teenager I know, I would call iPhone, which actually gets confusing there, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, do you see what I mean, though? You can't call people by verbs, right? And so, here's the thing that I had to try to figure out. What is God saying when God says, tell him I am? Well, you see, God wasn't trying to be coy with Moses. He wasn't trying to be mysterious. He wasn't playing hard to get or any of that nonsense. In fact, he was giving Moses and all of us one of the most important statements about himself. In fact, there's a really smart guy by the name of Dr. Christopher Wright. He's like an Old Testament guru, crazy smart this guy is. He says that God wasn't giving Moses a name. He does that later on. He was giving him a theology. God was making this amazing statement when he said, I am. He wasn't just saying, I exist or I have being or any of those stuff. He was telling us that he is self-sufficient. He is God all by himself. He doesn't need any help. That's what I am means when God says it. He exists. He is. He's not dependent on anyone or anything for his being. Now, you might be thinking right about now, what does this have to do with the Mid-Autumn Festival or the fact that Taemin and Kyung Mi have gotten married and we're celebrating, or that the food in the other room is going to get cold and I need to stop talking? You might be wondering that, and it's all good questions, all really good questions. So if you just hang with me for like 6 more minutes, I promise, I'm going to land this plane, all right? Whether it makes sense or not, I'm going to land it, okay? All right, so here's the thing. Hold on to that thought about I am, okay? Don't lose that. You too, especially, okay? All right. Did you know that the Korean language is one of the oldest languages in existence? Well, yes, some of you probably knew that, didn't you? Yeah, okay. All right. For the rest of you that didn't know, did you know Korean is one of the oldest languages in existence? In fact, it was modern Korean, and then there was mid-Korean, and then there was old Korean, and then there's what was called Proto-Korean. And some scholars think that Proto-Korean is like prehistoric. That's how old it is. We know at least that it's like 3500 BC. That's Korean. In fact, there's only a handful of languages that old. It's Korean, there's Chinese, there's Hebrew, there's Greek, and there's Sanskrit. Now, part of the reason I tell you that because the English language is only like, 1,500 years. It's like a baby compared to all these other languages. And it kind of makes sense when you think about how young the English language is, that it really is just an amalgamation. It's like a mud, really. That's what the English language is. It's like the Frankenstein's monster of languages. You take from all the ancient languages and their derivatives and all that kind of stuff, and that's where you come up with the English language. And so what's really interesting about that to me is that verb form, I am, it comes from Sanskrit. It comes from a symbol. The symbol is Om. And you might think, what's that have to do with anything? Hold on, there. But you've probably heard it in some religious speak or in some meditations where guys sit cross-legged and have their fingers like that and go, they're saying. They're saying Om. Now, Om, it comes from a Sanskrit word called prana. And guess what prana means? To breathe. You see, what's really cool about this is that the ancient languages, they really got everything down to the very basics. And so when you want to talk about existence, being, instead of going through all these irregular verbs, they just said, well, if you exist, then you breathe. So it means to breathe. That's where we get the word I am. I am means, in effect, in Sanskrit, I breathe. Right? It also means, it's where we get the word amen. You've heard the word amen, right? It means so be it. Because it's part of that verb to be, right? So to breathe is to live. To breathe is to exist. To breathe is to be. That's how the ancient thinking went. And the only one who can be all by himself is God. You can't, and I can't. You know how Hamlet said to be or not to be? That is the question. I hate to break it to Bill Shakespeare, but I got it wrong. Because the question for us isn't to be or not to be. You see, you and me, we can choose not to be. You could choose not to be tonight, God forbid, but you could. You could choose not to be tomorrow, but you know what you don't do in the morning? You won't choose to be. You see, you won't choose to wake up, you'll just wake up, and it'll be for another reason. You won't choose to breathe in the morning. If you breathe, it will be for another reason. If your heart is still pounding, it will be for another reason. It's not that you get to choose that. In fact, the only thing that we ever really get to choose is pursue the source of being or pursue not being. That's at the heart of it. And so, when God says to Moses, I am, he is telling us that he is the only one who gets to be all by himself. And so when you read this psalm that Taemin and Kyung-mi love so much, that truth is reinforced. When you hear this verse 30 and it says, when you give them your breath, meaning God, when you give them your breath, life is created. Why? Because I am means to breathe. When God gives us his breath, he gives us life. He gives you life. You're alive in this moment, not because you chose to be, but because God gave you this moment. God gave you this breath. Now, you don't have to agree with me, and it's totally cool if you don't. I mean, my job's just to deliver the goods, right? I mean, you got to decide what to do with it, right? But if you move away from God, you need to know that you choose not to be. When you realize this, then it only makes sense that moving toward God, you move toward life, you move toward being, you move toward intensely full existence. You move the other direction, you move toward not being. Oh, don't get me wrong, you may still get to 70 or 80 or 90 years. But when you move away from God, you will be drip by drip, step by step, day by day, choosing not to be. So when our precious friends Taemin and Kyung-mi recite their favorite verse, they will sing praises to God with their last breath. They aren't simply saying that they will sing until they die. They are saying that their entire existence is committed to one great song to God. All we are is offered to God in praise through his Son, Jesus the Christ. That's what they're saying when they read that verse to each other. They're saying, we want the breath we are given, the life we experience, to be wholly committed to God. And this, I'm convinced, is one of the reasons so many of us love them as we do. Because they're not just amazing musicians, they're phenomenal human beings. And you should be proud. You raised two great kids. You did. So tonight we give thanks for these two beautiful people. We give thanks for their marriage, their lives, and their health. We give thanks for the harvest and the Mid-Autumn Festival. We give thanks for love and hope and life. We give thanks for the great I Am and Jesus, His Son, who is the way, the truth, and the life. Because He is, we are. We're granted one more day to move toward God, toward the source of our life. Or we have one more day to choose to pursue other things, to choose not to be. But for today, for this moment, for one more day, we get to be. And we give thanks to our great God and our Father through His Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen. Kamsahamnida.
Thank you, Patrice and Pastor Ron.